Number 5. In 1970, the unidentified charred body of a woman was found in Isde Valley, also known as Death Valley in Bergen, Norway, by a professor and his 2 daughters while out hiking. The circumstances surrounding her death are still considered a profound mystery. She was naked, tags had been removed from all her clothing. Her fingerprints had been sanded away, and next to her was a burnt passport. At the scene, a significant amount of sleeping pills were discovered, along with bottles of petrol. The body was traced to 2 suitcases at a train station in Bergen, where police discovered a prescription for lotion, though the name and address of the doctor had been removed. They also discovered 500 German marks and a journal with entries in code. Police established the deceased woman traveled around Europe with up to 9 false identities: Genevieve Lancia, Claudia Gelt, Vera Shalasanik, Claudia Nielsen, Alexia Zarna-Merchez, Vera Jarl, Fenella Lork, and Elizabeth Lean Hoifer. Witnesses said she would wear various wigs and spoke many languages, including French, German, English, and Flemish. The final sight of the Isde Woman was when she checked out of room 407 at Hotel Marlin, paying cash and leaving in a taxi. She was described as 30 to 40 years old, 164 centimeters in height, and good-looking. She smoked cigarettes, appeared to be on guard, and was heard saying the words, "I am coming soon." 3 decades later, a man came forward, said he saw the mystery woman walking into the forest with 2 men in black coats following her. He said police had told him to keep quiet at the time. The case remains unsolved to this day, with most assuming the Isde Woman was a spy. Number 4. In 1931, a man claiming to be Albert Johnson arrived in the Northwest Territory of Canada with little explanation, and seemingly even less of a plan. Nonetheless, the mystery man built a secluded cabin in the woods near the Rat River and mainly kept to himself, or so it seemed. Soon the native trappers were complaining to the mounted police about someone tampering with the animal traps they used as their livelihood. The police assumed that the most logical culprit must be the creepy new guy, so a group of them decided to pay Johnson a visit. On the first visit to the secluded cabin, Johnson refused to even acknowledge the officers. But when the Mounties arrived a second time, Johnson greeted them with unannounced gunfire that whizzed right through the door, wounding one of the officers. Of course, the next time the Mounties came to Johnson's cabin, they brought dynamite. However, even a whole gang of police laying siege to the cabin, eventually demolishing it, Johnson held out. Eventually, the madman fled and was chased into the deadly frozen wilderness, where he miraculously led officers on a week-long chase before he single-handedly scaled a cliff wall and disappeared. Exhausted and a little amazed at Johnson's survival skills, the Canadian police hired a small plane to assist in the search, and finally, 40 days after and 150 miles away from their first encounter, Johnson was found and shot down. Interestingly, his identity and real name have never been determined. Only an alias he used, Albert Johnson, which was a fake name. DNA tests carried out in 2007 have shown that he was likely from either Scandinavia or the American Midwest, but other than that, there's no information on the man's past was ever uncovered, leaving nothing but questions. Number 3. In 1863, the Canadian province of Nova Scotia was relatively peaceful and somewhat remote. Much of business and communication with the mainland was done via ship. Along the coastlines, fishing was the main industry. On the morning of September 8th, 2 fishermen of Digby County were headed down to the shore where they discovered a man sitting on the sand. From a distance, the fishermen took the stranger as being someone just looking out across the waters. But the morning was quite cold, and something seemed not right, so the men approached the figure. They could see the young man was sitting up and that there was a loaf of bread and jug next to him. He also seemed to be feeling the ill effects of the extreme cold from the previous night. Most notable, however, was the fact that the man was missing the bottom half of both his legs. Alarmed, the men knew the stranger needed immediate medical help, and so they carried him back to their village. The stranger seemed to understand what was going on around him, but he could not respond to any questions put to him. After being repeatedly questioned, he seemed to mumble something that sounded like Jerome, and that is the name the villagers gave him. A local doctor noted that the amputation of his legs was very recent. The stumps were bleeding. They had been heavily bandaged, and apparently, the removal had been done by someone with surgical skills. Most likely, the men had then been put ashore by a passing ship. But why? Jerome provided no answers. Over the next 50 years, Jerome became a pet project for those living in the area, and he would move from one local house to another and spend years at each household for the rest of his life. The government eventually awarded $2 a week to the family that was housing Jerome at any specific time. Even from the start, Jerome was a puzzle to his neighbors. His hands were soft and showed no signs of manual labor. The clothes he was wearing when he was found were fancy, and his hair was neatly trimmed. The villagers persisted in trying to get Jerome to speak, but even a local man who happened to be fluent in 5 languages could not get a response. Despite living for years at a time with local families, Jerome never bonded with anybody. He would spend much of his time crouching next to the stove in the kitchen and would frequently growl when people approached him. He died on April 15, 1912, never providing a clue as to his early years or why he had been left abandoned on that beach. Number 2. It's July 1954, a hot day. A man arrives at the Haneda Airport in Tokyo, Japan. He was described as having a Caucasian appearance and was neatly dressed. The man was part of the crowd as it made its way through customs. It seemed like he was just like any other businessman on a trip. The man also told custom officials that the trip was only one of his 3 trips to Japan that year, but the officials are suspicious. On checking his passport, they see that he hails from a country called Taured. The passport looked genuine, except for the fact that there is no such country as Taured. The man is interrogated and asked to point out where his country supposedly exists on a map. He immediately points his finger towards the Principality of Andorra, but becomes angry and confused. He's never heard of Andorra and can't understand why his homeland of Taured isn't there. He spoke French, and officials believed it was his primary language. However, he also spoke Japanese and several other languages. The man also showed the customs officers his wallet, which contained various currencies from his frequent travels. The custom officials decide to solve the mystery while placing him in a hotel room guarded by officials. Later, when the hotel was opened, the man had mysteriously disappeared and was never found again. Number 1. In October 1945, a deaf teenager was found wandering the streets of Jacksonville, Illinois, unable to speak, sign, or otherwise communicate. The only thing he could write was the name Lewis. After trying for some time to locate his relatives and failing, a judge sentenced him to the state's mental health system, and as he was the 24th nameless person to enter the system, he became known as John Doe number 24. The name ended up sticking with him until he died. After being subjected to abuse for years in the state mental institution, things got worse for John, as he eventually lost his eyesight as well, possibly as a side effect of diabetes. Once that happened, he was transferred to several different nursing homes after 30 years in the federal mental health system. He was reported to have kept a sense of humor, though, and was a cheerful guy who enjoyed dancing to music. When he died of a stroke at a nursing home in Peoria in 1993, no one was any closer to discovering who he was or where he had come from. Musician Mary Chaplin Carpenter purchased a headstone for his unmarked grave when she learned of his story. She even immortalized him in a song called John Doe number 24.